Criminal street gangs have become one of the most serious crime problems in California. Gang violence, particularly assaults, drive-by shootings, homicides, and brutal home invasion robberies account for one of the largest single personal threats to public safety in this state. There's definitely a major problem, and a real solution is really needed. Because after a quarter of a century of a multi-billion-dollar war on gangs, there are 6 times as many gangs. And despite decades of research into gangs and violence, there is no single definitive formula for success. There are no quick fixes for the problems youth gangs create or the problems that create youth gangs. Recruitment into the gang usually starts in middle schools, where the age group is between 10 and 13. Some recruitment has also been seen in elementary schools and into the early years of high school. Most gangs target youth that are easily talked into doing work for the gang. Current gang members will often use peer pressure or fear or intimidation tactics to get others to join their gang. Providing cigarettes, alcohol, and other drugs as a lure is another method of recruitment. Kids are often confronted by gang members in their neighborhood, in school, or on the internet and are asked to join the gang. Young people are told the big lies about all the good things that happen when they join. They're told they'll earn a lot of money, make friends, go to parties, and belong to a close family that will care for and love them. Young people may be enticed by the glorified images of gangsters and the gangster lifestyle portrayed in music and movies. Today, the Insider Exclusive investigative news team visits with Hooman Fakimi of the law firm of Fakimi & Associates. In this Insider Exclusive Investigative Network TV special, America's Gang Epidemic: Criminal Defense Strategies. Hooman will discuss in depth key critical issues and steps to take if you or a family member are ever charged with a gang crime, like what is California Penal Code 18622 PC, the Criminal Street Gang Enhancement Law. How are gangs identified? Gang types, common gang initiations, why young people join gangs, major factors that may contribute to youth gang involvement, what is considered active participation in a criminal street gang, how does a prosecutor prove someone is in a gang, what are the short-term and long-term consequences of joining a gang, penalties and punishment, how can you fight gang crime charges, hiring a gang crimes defense attorney. If you are convicted of a gang crime, you could face stigma that may prevent you from obtaining gainful employment. You may be required to register as a gang member, spend time in prison, and follow a strict probationary period. Being labeled a gang member may also unfairly make you a target for other criminal charges. In several cases, Fakimi & Associates have proved that individuals being prosecuted are not active gang members at all. If they are not active gang members, they cannot be held responsible for gang-related criminal acts such as failure to register or recruitment. Sometimes prosecutors file gang enhancement charges with no valid reason for doing so. Fakimi & Associates team evaluates all aspects of gang crimes cases so they can develop a strong, multifaceted defense strategy. Because the state takes such an aggressive approach to gang prosecution, Fakimi & Associates works aggressively to protect their clients' rights and have charges dropped or reduced because the laws surrounding gang crimes in California are complex and you may be fighting multiple charges at once. Hooman has earned the highest respect from citizens and lawyers alike as one of the best criminal defense trial lawyers in Santa Ana, in California, and across the nation. He is driven to fight for people, and because of that, he has built a substantial reputation nationwide by consistently winning cases other law firms have turned down. His amazing courtroom skills and headline-grabbing success rate continue to provide his clients with the results they need and the results they deserve. This is the Insider Exclusive, live from Orange County, California. It is my great pleasure to introduce Hooman Fakimi to the show. Welcome to the show, Hooman.
Thank you, Steve.
Tell our audience a little bit about your firm. What type of law do you practice?
My practice is generally, when I say we are a small boutique firm of 4 lawyers, and my practice is devoted 50% to criminal defense, 50% to representation of employees, mainly employment law, which is a strange hybrid for a lot of attorneys. And the reason is that I'm in employment law is because I was general counsel to a publicly traded company, and at some point I had their entire operation of almost 800 employees as their general counsel, so I learned a lot about employment law there. Criminal defense was always my passion, and I had been a criminal defense attorney before. So now that I'm on my own practice, that's what we do, criminal defense,
right.
Labor law.
And you kind of specialize in the criminal defense area with gang crimes, don't you?
In the area of criminal defense, there is not such a thing as specialization. So if you ever see an attorney say, I'm a specialist in DUI, I'm a specialist, they are just making it up. There is no specialty. But there are attorneys that concentrate more on an area of law. And it just happened that most of my cases are out of Inland Empire area, which includes San Bernardino and Riverside. And there is a lot of allegations of gang activity there. I say allegations as we get to later. So yes, I do quite a bit of cases involving gang allegations or gang enhancements.
Hooman, tell our audience, the difference between when a person commits a crime of being not associated with a gang versus a person that the prosecution can prove that they are a gang member or affiliated with a gang. What's the difference in the penalties?
What happened, Steve, is in late 80s and 90s and throughout the late 90s, we had an influx of murders which were associated allegedly to gangs. And there was a lot of movies being made about it. 9 o'clock and 11 o'clock news were talking about it on a regular basis. And as it is the case mostly with our legislature, they react. They don't proact. They reacted, and they passed what's called the STEP Act, which is a Street Terrorism Enforcement and Protection Act. And that got codified under Penal Code 186 et al. So let's say there is a fight, a street brawl. That could fall under Penal Code 245 or a bunch of other codes as assault or battery. If the district attorney and the investigators feel it's gang-related, they can add gang enhancements to it, which is 186 to do under enhancements, and those can drastically increase the penalties. Right. And, for instance, that's the enhancement part.
Right. But is there kind of like a ratio, a multiplier? Let me give you an example. Let's say if a person was convicted of a crime, let's say it was assault, and let's say the normal imprisonment time would be 7 years. Is the multiplier of that usually something like 3 times that?
It's not 3 times that, it's almost double in some instances. If the gang allegation comes in, it's sometimes doubled, it's sometimes tripled, but there are certain cases that it could be life. It's not on every case, but certain cases, if that enhancement sticks, then the crime could be a life-carrying crime. And I'll give you an example of a small one, which many people don't realize, tagging, for instance. The graffiti we see, they have put that under a 186. And for 186 to apply, they have to jump through a few holes, meaning the defendant actively participated in the gang, had knowledge of the gang, willfully promoted it, and the standard to prove those are so low that they almost can do it with any bunch of group of kids. Now then, that graffiti, the kid who wrote the graffiti could be charged as a gang member. Yes. He will go into CalGang, which is the database that the City of California has for his future, and he will have a strike on his record, meaning he will have a strike just like someone who robbed someone or someone who attempted a murder.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you this. We see this increase in the punishment of these crimes. Has it deterred young people from committing them? Has it worked? That was the point of it.
It's hard to say. If you look at
The kid who was tagging, for example.
no,
No.
tagging, it hasn't helped with tagging, but it depends who you ask. If you ask prosecutors, they'll bring numbers that will show that the numbers have decreased. If you talk to ACLU or if you talk to civil liberties union organizations, they will tell you that no, it actually has not, because if you see the increase in population and also the increase in other crimes, it really hasn't. I have to say, as a criminal defense attorney, I tend to be biased, obviously, but I do believe there are necessary laws to deal with gangs. Most of them are not good people. But today here we'll discuss about the government overreaching.
Let's talk about that. How do prosecutors prove a gang affiliation or association? Or am I using these words incorrectly when I said affiliation, association, or active member? Is there any difference?
There should be a difference, but unfortunately there isn't. So in essence, the statute, the way it reads it, and I would like to find the language which is essentially the most important part, is that association, solicitation, participation, conspiracy, they all tie you into the gang.
Let me give you an example. You go to a birthday party of your neighborhood friend. The neighborhood friends in a gang. Is that considered participation in a gang?
If you go to a neighborhood party and the neighbor who's throwing the party is a gang member,
you're not in a gang.
I will get to that because there's no crime. You're not telling me about any crimes.
Yeah,
being
what I'm
committed
talking about is, can a prosecutor prove that based on that person's association, they went to their birthday parties, they went to the Saturday night dances, whatever, that they were an active member of a gang?
They can prove that. They have to prove more. They have to prove knowledge on his part, that he knew. But I will read you the code, so that I think this is the best way to understand it. 186.22 says, any person who actively participates in any criminal street gang with knowledge that its members engage or have engaged in a pattern of criminal activity, or who willfully promotes, further, or assists in any felonious conduct by members of the gang. So it applies not only to people who are participating, it could be people who are assisting, or it could be people who are alleged to have assisted in that. Therefore, it could catch, the net could be so wide that it can catch people who are bystanders.
Yeah. Now, you have two cases that you told us a little bit about that are on appeal.
Yes.
We can't mention their names because of those reasons, okay? But tell our audience a little bit about the facts of those two cases.
The reason I picked those two cases is because I really like our audience to get an idea of what we're talking about here in the media. Gangsters and the thug life is something that we should all detest, and we all do. But there is a difference when we start expanding this wide net of referring to incidents as gang related, because then you are putting millions of people, especially from the underclass, the underprivileged, who could be part of that gang, alleged gang. And what it will do is it will kill their chances of growth. It will demolish their self-esteem, self-confidence. And what happens? They by default join those gangs. Most of these people and most of these are kids. And by kid, I mean 13, 14, 15, 16. It's unbelievable that these kids are getting caught up. The problem is, with all this gang stuff that we talked about, the standard has been lowered with regards to what the jury can hear. Okay, so they have what they call their gang experts, the law enforcement prosecutors do, yeah. And those experts, I printed it and I'll show it later, I'll go over them later. They are taught step by step, basically, how to convince the jury about. And one of the ways you do is you have to undermine the credibility. you have to undermine the character of the defendants. And the first way you do it is establish they're a gang member. Well, 186 has made it so easy for anyone to be accused of being a gang member. It can be a group of 2 or 3 people or more, 4 people.
They're already profiled.
Yes. Basically, if a group of 4 people get together, and then they have to have promoted some kind of an associated, they call it a predicate offense, gang activity, and that becomes so easy for them to do. So these gang experts will get up there and they will talk about, yes, we have Cal gang, we have looked him up, and this gentleman, he's in the Cal gang. Well, ACLU did a study a couple of years ago with regards to the numbers of mistakes they make in Cal gang, and
A lot of them, right?
a lot of them, and one of them was really interesting. There was something about, I believe there were 42 people on the list whose date of birth was 1 year of age, and they had been admitted, they had supposedly admitted to being gang members, 1-year-olds. There were people on the list which should not have been because they had met the requirement of being removed.
Yeah. Now, are you allowed to present this information to a jury?
Yes.
You are. So let's talk about that, because you already have strikes against your client for being classified as a gang member. How do you address a jury that really doesn't care? How do you convince them to look at a case objectively? And when you talked about your client being 10 blocks away and the other guy being across the street, how do you try to persuade them and says, please, use your head, think rationally here. How could my client get there? And here's a map and that sort of thing. How can you successfully do that with a jury?
What we do is, I know we can't use them here, we'll print out maps of the area. I have a witness, an investigator who works solely for me. He's an in-house investigator who goes on every case.
Right, and we'll have him on here.
Yes, yes. Many firms, they don't have in-house investigators. They have investigators they hire, so it's hard for every case, the amount of money that's spent. Our guy is in-house. He will go there, he will track. So in this case, he drove to the location and back. He walked and back, and he ran and back and recorded the whole thing. We did Google Map, we did Google.
And can show the jury this.
And the DA will fight it. The DA will fight it and say it's cumulative, meaning it's too much information.
Too much information?
Well, cumulative basically means you've shown it once, why are you showing it again? But we get it. Repetitive, but they call it cumulative. The objection is. Yes, we show it to them as much as we can. As far as the mistakes that the Cal gang does, we show it to them. But invariably, after trials, when I talk to jurors, they tell me that they really didn't care about that. It's unbelievable that our system, which is supposed to be based on presumption of innocence, when it comes to the higher crimes, the presumption for jurors lowers.
So in other words, people are fed up with these crimes. They don't care. And the problem is when a prosecutor accuses someone, when the state accuses or a city accuses someone, they're automatically assumed guilty. So you're guilty until proven innocent. Now, your client, this particular client, and the other client were both convicted, correct?
They were both convicted.
And they're on appeal.
And they're on appeal. I don't represent them on appeal. I don't do appellate work. They are on appeal. And appeals, as you know, generally revolve around issues of law. Meaning, number one, did the attorney make any mistakes? Thank God.
You can't retry the case.
Well, you can, but that's what I'm getting to. The only two ways to get a case overturned is either ineffective assistance of counsel, which rarely happens. In some states, I've heard attorneys fall asleep at, but that, or you show that the judge made a mistake in admitting a piece of evidence. In this case, there was a tattoo on my client's hand, and according to their expert, that tattoo had a certain meaning. Okay, a certain meaning about violence, that, in my opinion, should not have been introduced. Because what it did was, it's called character evidence, right? It was showing something that the client has committed a prior bad act or has a tendency.
Profiling them again.
It is, but under the evidence code, you're not allowed to, for instance, in a battery case, say, oh, by the way, he had a fight 2 years ago, because it's, again, using evidence which is not related to this
Yeah,
case.
so that's the appealable issue, correct?
I believe that that's the appealable issue for my client.
Yeah. Today we have with us, you have an in-house investigator. His name is Imagineer Quintero.
Quintero, yes.
Okay, we'll have him on in a minute. We also have with us your gang expert who's a retired Indio police officer, correct?
Correct. And Indio is one of the cities within Inland Empire, which is miles away from Desert Hot Springs. And before I go further, I want to tell you...
Let me just mention his name, Enrique Tira.
Enrique Tira. For your audience, just it's important for them to know, Desert Hot Springs and Indio are 10 miles away maybe from Palm Springs, one of the wealthiest enclaves in Southern California. This is something that the public has to pay attention to, that they may feel safe in their Palm Springs home, but by not paying attention to it, there is an underworld, an underclass.
It's a cancer
in the United States, and it will eat up the country unless politicians pay attention to it and start investing in the youth.
Yeah. Well, let's bring them on right
Sure.
now. It is my great pleasure to introduce Enrique Tira. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
You work together with Who Man as a gang expert, is that correct?
I do.
And your background is, we talked earlier, you were a police officer in the city of Indio and a gang task member, were you not?
I was assigned to our local gang unit with the department at one point, yes.
In your role in working with a law firm here, what is your job to support the cases and the clients that Human takes on?
Well, we look at what we call factors or indicators that the government uses to establish and validate someone as an active gang member within a gang. And we look at those factors and how they use them to get to that point of someone being an active participant within a gang.
So there are cases that you take on where the prosecutors accuse someone of being a gang member when, based on your investigation, it proves that they're not, correct?
Yes.
Now, do you generally have to prove this in court, or can you go to the prosecutor and say, hey, look, this is what we found? You know, are prosecutors amenable to that information?
They are, and what Enrique was talking about is the fact that nowadays anyone can be labeled a gang. So if Enrique brings me information that I can take to a prosecutor and show that this is not a gang, they will. But generally it doesn't happen like that because there is a gang. What Enrique will bring to me is that this was not gang related, or this guy is not part of this gang. And in that case, yes, when we explained before, there are decent prosecutors who will listen to you and they will work with you. But in general, because of the fact that there's so much attention on gangs, it's an uphill battle.
Let me ask you this. When a police officer arrests somebody who the police officer said, this is a gang member, and he takes his mugshot, does it automatically go into this database right away, or does he have to be convicted of a crime associated with a gang?
When they get arrested, they take their mugshots at the jail, and that automatically stays in their system.
It stays in the system, but how about in the gang database?
The Cal Gang database, and Enrique can talk about this more, is you don't even have to be convicted of anything to be part of that.
So you can be in that database?
Yes.
So the reason I'm asking this question is, if you're stopped by the police, and let's say you're now convicted and the charge is dismissed, if you're stopped by a police officer again, they have access to this database. They see that you're in the database, even though you were never convicted of a gang-related crime or a crime period. You're screwed, aren't you?
Well, that's one of the indicators or factors that is used by the government to prove or to show that they're being validated as a gang member.
Right. The fact that they're in the database, whether they belong there or not.
Whether they belong there or not, and that's part of my job is to see what information is being inputted into that database so I can provide it to the attorney and then he could use it.
Yeah, and Human, you mentioned that the ACLU found that there were, something like 42 cases of people that were 1 year old that were in this database. Now, let me ask you, if I was a lawyer that wanted to do some good, for society, I would go to whoever operates the gang database and say, hey, look, you got 12 kids who are 1 year old in this database. How do you get a person's name removed from there or their picture?
Well, you have to go through the Cal gang and you have to challenge it, and they eventually will.
You got to go to
remove it.
court for all
You
this.
have to go to court for it.
Costs money.
Costs money, but also according to the statute, in order to remain on that list, and Enrique can correct me, there has to be a certain period of time between the crimes that have occurred for that gang to be considered an active gang. So essentially, let's say I call myself, Human's gang. There's one crime now. There has to be another crime within 3 years? Within 3 years. If there isn't, if the next crime is 10 years from it, they can't be in that, correct?
Correct.
In that list. But they keep it in that list. And once they have it, they pull someone over, they look at it, they say, okay, fine, you're here. And that goes, by the way, to the issue we can discuss later, which is gang injunctions, which is basically they are saying certain towns, certain cities, certain street, two people cannot get together. Two people. And he can explain more about what they are.
Yes, and those are civil injunctions, and when they are qualified or validated in those injunctions, there's certain restrictions that they have at certain times of the day and night in certain areas within the city, which could be a whole city.
Yeah. And in Indio, I think you mentioned earlier, the entire city is subject to this, isn't it?
The entire city is subject to being what is called gang-related part of the city for one gang or another.
Let me ask you something. As an investigative reporter myself, if I was out investigating late at night to meet some of these gang members, and there were two of them together, let's say they were known gang members, and I'm investigating them, am I now a gang member because I'm associating with known gang members?
And it's funny you bring that up, because if you are contacted possibly with those two known gang members, you can be labeled an associate of the gang member, and now therefore
just by questioning them,
just by talking to them, and now they can do a card or a contact on you for a later date, which can apply to the gang allegation.
What if I didn't know that they were gang members? Did it make any difference?
It does not make any difference. You are associating with two gang members, you can be labeled as an associate of that gang.
One of the reasons we wanted to do this show is you worked in a gang, you worked for the police department for many, many years, worked with all of these gang task forces, etc. What do you have to say to young people today who live in areas where there are gangs prevalent there, okay? What do you say to them to keep out of trouble, to avoid? What's your best advice you can say to them?
My best advice is these kids are raised and they grow up in these neighborhoods, and they go to school with these gang members. Just do not take part and associate with these gang members when it comes to doing any of these activities to do with the gang.
In all the cases that you've handled for this law firm, what one stands out in your mind as where you did the best you possibly could and help somebody avoid gang charges and that sort of thing?
There was a case involving allegations of membership based on tattoos that they carry. And Enrique's help really helped me because, there are so many tattoos. And these
You knew the tattoos.
He knows the tattoos.
And not only the tattoos, is when the tattoos were placed, where they got them, how old they were when they got them. So all that goes into...
So a lot of people might get them when they're young, not really realizing what they're getting involved with.
And they have them for 10, 15 years. And like he said, is we get the information, we provide it, and he works with whatever we can come up with to come to the best possible
I think what really helps is you're identified as a ex-police officer working the gangs for how many years?
Well, I was with the police department for 17 and a half years, and throughout my career, I worked
Well,
the local gangs.
you know, I will say this to you, you know, because I mean what I say. The fact that, you know, you're working with a law firm to help some of these cases where people are automatically prosecuted or people are automatically labeled where they shouldn't be, my hat's off to you, because you don't have to do this. We hear about a lot of police officers that retire and they just go about their merry way. You're looking to try to change the system, so I respect you for that.
Thank you. And not only on top of me being in law enforcement with the police department for 17 and a half years, I grew up in the same type of neighborhoods that I
You
now
come from that
assist.
neighborhood.
I do.
Yeah.
And not only did I learn, I lived that lifestyle growing up, so I know it very well.
Okay, well, we'd love to have you back again, and I want to thank you very much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
It is my great pleasure to introduce Imagineer Quintero. Welcome to the show, Imagineer.
Thank you, Mr. Steve.
You are an investigator for Human's firm, right?
Absolutely.
What exactly do you do?
My job is to dissect reports and also go into the field and corroborate the stories that the government has on our clients. And if not, then find the truth.
Okay, and in some cases, without mentioning names, how have you been able to dispel what the prosecutor alleged?
The most important work that has to be done is going into the field and into the community. Learning about how the community works between families, gangs, homeless, helps a lot, because by befriending the community, I've been able to get in, get the information, and get out.
We had talked earlier about one of the cases where you were able to show that your client was 10 blocks away from the actual scene of the crime when somebody else was right across the street who is supposedly the alleged.
Well, that was our story. That was our theory.
Yeah. The reports, when you prepare these reports, you prepare like a Google map, a visual. How do you do that?
Everything. We go into satellite Google Maps to make sure that I identify the location. Then once I go into the actual location based on addresses that we receive, I go in and I start literally walking sometimes. Sometimes I drive and I do measure the distances and I Google map the measurements.
Now, you also go into gang-infested areas.
Yes.
And you go there to talk to people.
Yes.
What's usually the reception that you get? All across the board? Or
All
what?
across the board, people welcome me.
They welcome you.
From the gangs to the gang members.
So
to
you
the
come
enemies.
there, imagine like we came here. You came to me, I was a person living in the neighborhood. You said, I'm coming here to talk about John Smith. Okay, what do you know about John Smith?
And that's where, when he says welcoming, I think he's talking about the ones that he's been successful in.
Yeah,
There
but there are people that don't want to talk to you.
Absolutely, yeah.
Absolutely.
And what do they tell you?
They just shut down. They don't want to talk. And I just want to make sure that I confirm their identity and so that I can write my report based on that.
Okay, and they do confirm their identity.
For the most part, yes.
Okay, and these are people that are related to the case, correct?
These are people who we feel have information which will help the case.
Yeah, but let me ask you this question. You know, you as a lawyer, you have your own investigator who's paid by you to go out, get information to help your client. Doesn't the prosecutor look with suspicion upon reports like this?
Oh, absolutely. What we do is, Imaginer will go there, will prepare a report, and
They corroborate it.
and he takes a picture of the person, attaches a CD of the person attached to the interview, and we give it to the DA.
I'm just kind of curious. You know, you represent a lot of people who have had trouble with the law. Do you ever follow up on any of these? Do they learn to avoid trouble in the future?
Recidivism is high, as you know.
Is that because of economic reasons primarily?
You know, I'm going to be honest. I'm not going to be. Some of it is. Some of it is internal. It's in, you know, some people.
It's who they are.
DNA. Some of it is drugs that they have to support themselves. But recidivism is high. But one of the reasons is also that this stigma of being having a criminal record denies them jobs which they can get and make a decent
So
money.
they can't go straight. I mean, basically, right?
A lot do,
difficult.
but some don't. Yeah, some don't.
So, Imagineer, what motivates you to do the job that you're doing right now?
Because I believe that based on what I do and going deep into a case can make a big difference in the outcome in the courthouse. I understand that the most important job in this field is the attorney's job because he has to represent whatever investigation. But if the investigation is mediocre or comes up with false information or is not complete, most likely, based on my experience in working with Mr. Human, we have been very successful together because we make a good team. My job is to provide him with the information that he needs.
And I want to stress again, you did mention it, that most criminal defense law firms do not have full-time investigators, right?
That's correct.
They have
because
part-time guys.
They don't have part-time, they have independent contractors. So what will happen is they will get a case and then they will call someone and say, here, how much would you charge to do
Yeah,
investigation?
and then do the minimal amount of work.
Some investigators are great, some are, it all depends who they are. But with our cases, we talk about these cases constantly.
Yeah.
And we live and breathe our cases, which is not a good thing necessarily because it destroys your life. But with him being in-house, it certainly gives us a leg up. And also clients know that at any point they can pick up the phone and talk to him.
He's a real asset, no question about it.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
And I want to thank you very much for being on the show.
Likewise.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Cool, man. You have a lot of people contact you regarding allegations of crimes, being arrested, and that sort of thing. How do you choose the cases that you want to work on?
You know, that's a question I always get asked, especially the kind of cases I do. And my answer always is, my profession is one of the only ones, I think the only one actually specifically stated in the United States Constitution. Whoever is accused by government of committing a crime has a right to representation. Now, that representation includes fighting to prove that they're not guilty. That's part of it. The other part is to fight to see that they get a fair sentence. So, yes, I may represent someone who has committed a crime and is fully open about it. But without a lawyer, that person can receive a sentence which is not fair and constitutional. So in those cases, my job would not be to show who done it. And I tell my clients up front, my job is to make sure you go in that court and you don't get sandbagged.
Yeah. Okay. I want to thank you very much for spending time with us on the show.
Thank you, and I thank you for coming.
Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at insiderexclusive.com.